All right, deep divers, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive.
Always.
Today we're gonna tackle Adlerian psychology.
Cool.
We're gonna be looking at the book The Courage to be Disliked.
That's a good one. I like how that book's set up.
Yeah, it's kind of neat.
Yeah, it's written like a conversation, right?
Yeah, like a dialogue.
A dialogue between this young guy, who's struggling with life, and this Adlerian philosopher.
So it's pretty good format.
Yeah.
Especially for us.
For us, yeah, exactly.
So right away in the book we get this kind of the central tension. You have this young guy who's unhappy. He's looking for some answers.
Yeah.
But he's also like pretty skeptical of the philosopher's ideas.
He doesn't want to believe it.
Yeah, which is understandable. Some of it's pretty out there.
Yeah, yeah.
There's this anecdote at the beginning about the young guy's friend who's terrified to leave his house, like full-blown agoraphobia. And the philosopher just flat out says, he's not trapped. He's choosing to stay inside.
He's choosing to stay inside, yes.
And he even goes as far as to say that, he could even be making up symptoms to justify it.
Yeah, and that's pretty counterintuitive, right? Like, that's not how we usually think about it.
Yeah, how does Adlerian psychology even explain that? Like, how can you choose to feel or act a certain way?
Well, it comes down to this idea of teleology versus etiology.
Okay, break that down for me.
So etiology is all about looking at the causes of our problems, right? Like, what happened in the past that's making us feel this way now? What events or experiences led to these feelings?
Okay, so that's kind of the traditional approach, like digging into your past, finding those root causes.
Right. But Adlerian psychology takes a different approach. They focus on teleology, which is about looking at the purpose of our actions and emotions. Like, what are we trying to achieve by feeling or behaving this way?
So even something like anxiety could be serving a purpose.
Yeah, it's about asking, what is this anxiety helping you avoid?
That's a pretty radical shift in perspective.
It is, and the book gives us a great example of a woman who's terrified of blushing.
Oh, I count blushing, yeah.
Turns out she was using that fear to avoid telling someone she liked how she felt.
Interesting. So even though she wasn't consciously aware of it, her fear was actually serving a purpose, protecting her from potential rejection.
Exactly. And the philosopher points out that even if her blushing was cured, she'd probably find another reason to avoid confessing her feelings.
So it's not really about the blushing itself, it's about the underlying goal of avoiding that awkward situation.
Right. And Adler would say, she's fulfilling a goal by creating that fear around blushing.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this teleology thing works. But even if we accept that our emotions can serve a purpose, what about the impact of our past? Trauma, difficult childhoods. Surely those things shape who we are.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And Adler doesn't deny that, the past happens, but he believes that we get to decide how we interpret it.
So it's not about denying the past, it's about choosing how it affects us now.
Exactly.
Like we have the power to reinterpret those experiences and move forward in a way that empowers us.
Absolutely. And, there's this quote in the book that really captures this idea. It says, the important thing is that nothing is actually determined by those influences. We determine our own lives according to the meaning we give to those past experiences.
That's pretty powerful stuff. It's like taking back control of your own narrative.
Yeah, it is.
But I'm still trying to wrap my head around this whole idea of choosing our emotions. I mean, have you ever noticed how quickly your emotions can shift based on what you want to achieve?
Oh, totally. It's like when you're annoyed at someone,
Yeah.
but then you need to ask them for a favor.
Yeah. Suddenly that annoyance just vanishes.
Right. Poof. It's like magic.
Exactly. It's like we can just turn our emotions on and off like a switch, depending on the situation.
Yeah. And the book has this perfect example. Like, it describes this mom, right?
Right.
Who is arguing with her daughter.
Uh-huh.
The phone rings. It's the daughter's teacher.
Right.
And immediately she switches to this super sweet, polite voice.
Like a completely different place.
Completely different. And then as soon as she hangs up, bam, right back to the argument.
It's almost like our emotions are tools that we use to navigate different situations.
That's a great way to put it. And,
Yeah.
it's a pretty radical idea, but when you start to pay attention, you see it happening all the time.
I'm definitely going to be more aware of that now.
Yeah.
But even if we accept that we can choose our emotions to some extent, this whole idea can feel kind of lonely.
Yeah, I get that.
Like if it's all up to us, if we're solely responsible for our own happiness, it can feel isolating.
Right. Right. And actually, the young guy in the book, he brings that up, too. He talks about the burden of freedom.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, if we don't have anyone else to blame for our unhappiness, where does that leave us?
And that's where this idea of the separation of tasks comes in, which Adler talks a lot about.
Separation of tasks. Okay, I'm intrigued. What's that all about?
So basically, it means we have to figure out what's in our control and what isn't.
Okay, I can see how that would be helpful.
So we are responsible for our own thoughts, emotions, and actions. Those are our tasks. But we can't control how other people feel or react. Those are their tasks.
So it's not about ignoring other people's feelings. It's about realizing that we can only change ourselves.
Exactly. Like, let's say you're choosing a career path, and your parents, they really don't approve.
Oh, I've been there.
Their disappointment, that's their task to deal with.
Right.
Your task is to choose the path that feels right for you.
So even though it might be hard to see them upset, you're not responsible for their feelings.
Right, right. You can't force them to be happy about your choices, just like they can't force you to choose a career that you hate.
That's a really helpful way to think about it. It's about setting healthy boundaries.
Yeah. And another example, imagine you've got this really difficult boss, right, who's just always angry.
Don't remind me.
You know, their anger, that's theirs to manage. You can't change that.
Nope.
Your task is to focus on doing your job to the best of your ability.
Not getting caught up in their drama.
Right. You got to stay in your own lane, focus on your own tasks.
This whole idea of separation of tasks is starting to make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's about taking ownership of your own experience without trying to control other people's reactions.
Exactly. And you know what? It's funny because even the book itself demonstrates this separation of tasks.
Really? How so?
Well, the philosopher, he's constantly redirecting the young guy back to what he can control, his own thoughts and actions.
Instead of getting caught up in what other people should be doing.
Right. It's a really subtle but powerful message about taking ownership.
That's a great point. It's like a subtle lesson woven into the very fabric of the book. But this brings us to another potentially challenging idea from the book. The idea that freedom means having the courage to be disliked.
Oh, yes.
Now, that sounds a little harsh, doesn't it? Like, are we really saying it's okay to just do whatever we want and not care about anyone else?
So it's not about, being selfish or inconsiderate. It's really about recognizing that you can't please everyone all the time.
Yeah, that's true. No matter what you do, someone's always going to have an opinion.
Exactly. And, a lot of us are driven by this desire for recognition, this constant seeking approval and validation from others.
I can definitely relate to that. I think it's something we're all conditioned to do from a young age.
Yeah. Think back to childhood, like so much of our learning is based on rewards and punishment.
You get good grades, you get praised. Mess up, you get punished.
Exactly. And you know what? We carry that pattern into adulthood, We're always seeking validation from bosses, partners, friends, even strangers on the internet.
It's like we're constantly looking for external validation instead of trusting our own judgment.
Yeah. And the book uses this great analogy. It
Yeah.
talks about Alexander the Great.
Oh, right, yeah.
Cutting the Gordian knot.
Okay, yeah, I remember that story.
It's about, breaking free from conventional thinking.
Yeah.
And choosing your own path, even if it means being disliked by some.
That's a powerful image. It's like saying, I'm not going to let other people's expectations dictate my life.
Yeah.
But I have to play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
Doesn't this sound like a recipe for just being completely self-centered? Like, where does community and caring for others fit into all of this?
That's a good question, and it's one that the book definitely addresses. Adler believed that true community feeling comes from a place of genuine care and contribution.
What?
It doesn't come from, trying to control others or seeking recognition.
So it's not about being a doormat or just doing whatever everyone else wants. It's about finding a balance between self-care and contributing to something bigger than yourself.
Exactly, and he differentiates between two types of relationships. Vertical and horizontal.
Vertical and horizontal. Okay, what's the difference?
So think about the relationship between a boss and an employee.
Okay, yeah, that's a pretty clear power dynamic.
Right. One person is seen as superior, the other as inferior.
Okay, so that's a vertical relationship.
Exactly. But imagine a relationship where both people see each other as equals. With mutual respect and understanding.
So like a close friendship or a healthy romantic partnership.
Right. Those are examples of horizontal relationships.
And Adler believes that focusing on those horizontal relationships is key to experiencing that true community feeling.
Exactly.
It's about connecting with others on a level playing field. But that raises another question for me. If we're not seeking external validation, How do we feel like we have value? Like, where does that sense of worth come from?
That's a great question. And you know what? Adlerian psychology offers a really interesting perspective on that.
I'm all ears.
It all comes down to understanding the difference between praise and encouragement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Help me unpack that one. What's the difference?
So praise often reinforces vertical relationships. Like imagine a mom, right? Praising her kid for doing the dishes.
Okay.
But she doesn't, offer the same courtesy to her husband.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like there's an underlying message there about who's more deserving of praise.
Right. It's subtly reinforcing that kind of, the child's lower status. But encouragement focuses on effort and contribution. It's not about judgment or comparison.
So instead of saying good job, we might say something like, I appreciate you helping out with the dishes, or I can see how much effort you put into that.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the inherent worth of the individual, regardless of their achievements.
That's a really subtle but important shift. It's about valuing the person rather than just their accomplishments.
Yeah. And the book actually, it suggests trying to shift our perspective from the level of acts, so what people do, to the level of being.
Okay, so it's about appreciating people for who they are, not just for what they do.
Exactly.
I like that. It's a more holistic way of seeing others. But even with all these ideas, I have to admit, the young guy's final struggle in the book, it really resonated with me.
Yeah.
He just can't seem to wrap his head around this idea of embracing the courage to be normal.
Oh, yeah.
It just sounds kind of depressing, doesn't it?
I think it comes down to, a misconception about what normal means.
Yeah, I think you're right. We often associate normal with being average or mediocre.
Exactly. But it's not about lowering our ambitions or settling for a less fulfilling life.
So what is it about then?
It's about shifting our perspective, like from seeing life as this linear story, like a straight line,
Okay.
to seeing it as a series of meaningful moments, like a collection of dots. And you know what Adler calls this?
No, tell me.
Kinetic versus energial life.
Kinetic versus energial. Okay, I'm intrigued. Break that down for me.
So in kinetic life, we're always focused on those future goals.
Always striving for what's next.
Yeah, the present is just a means to an end. We're not really fully present because we're always thinking about what we need to do next or what we need to achieve next.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that. It's like we're always chasing that next milestone, that next promotion, that next big thing, and we never really stop to appreciate where we are right now.
Exactly. But in energial life, each moment is lived fully, It's appreciated for what it is, regardless of the outcomes. It's like climbing a mountain.
Okay.
If the goal is only reaching the summit, anything less feels like a failure.
Right.
But if you can focus on the experience of climbing itself, the journey becomes the reward.
That's such a beautiful way to put it. It's not about giving up on our dreams, but about finding joy in the process of pursuing them. It's about embracing the courage to be normal, to live fully in each moment, rather than constantly chasing some distant ideal.
Yeah. And I think that's where the true potential for happiness lies.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary experiences are found in the ordinary moments.
Absolutely. It's fascinating how this idea of living each moment to the fullest really ties back to the book's title.
You mean the courage to be disliked?
Right. If we can let go of that constant need for validation from others, it frees us up to really focus on what brings us joy in each moment.
It's like we're finally giving ourselves permission to be authentic without worrying about, what other people think.
Right.
But I imagine this shift in perspective is a lot easier said than done.
Oh, definitely.
Like, it sounds great in theory, but how do we actually make that shift?
It's the process for sure. And the young man in the book, he really struggles with this.
Yeah, he does.
He's worried that if he lets go of that need to be, extraordinary, he'll just become average or mediocre.
Yeah, he's kind of equating normal with unsuccessful.
Right, and that's where the distinction between kinetic and energial life becomes so important. Remember, it's not about lowering our ambitions.
Right.
It's about shifting our focus from the destination to the journey itself.
Okay, I like that. So it's not about giving up on our dreams, but about finding joy in the process of pursuing them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about a musician, playing an instrument. They're not just playing to reach the end of the song.
They're lost in the music, expressing themselves through each note.
Yes. Or think about, like, a dancer. A dancer doesn't dance just to reach a specific point on the stage. The dance itself is the goal,
Right, the expression of movement and emotion in the present moment.
Exactly.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. It makes me realize how often we get so caught up in planning for the future, that we miss the beauty of what's happening right now.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into that trap, especially in, our fast-paced, achievement-oriented culture. We're constantly bombarded with messages about, like, what we should be doing, how we should be improving, what goals we should be striving for.
It's like we're always pushing ourselves to be better, to do more, to achieve more.
And we forget to just be.
Yeah, just to be present in the moment and appreciate what we have.
Exactly. And that's where the courage to be disliked comes in, right? If we can let go of the need to meet other people's expectations.
We free ourselves to focus on what truly matters to us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even if it's not something that's going to, bring us fame or fortune.
It's about finding fulfillment in our own unique way.
Right. And, the book actually argues that by embracing our normal selves, we can make a more meaningful contribution to the world.
Really?
Yeah. It's about finding fulfillment in our everyday actions and interactions, not just in, like, extraordinary achievement.
That reminds me of that example we talked about earlier with the mother washing dishes. It's not a glamorous task, but she finds joy in the act of caring for her family.
Right. And that feeling of contributing to something bigger than ourselves, it can bring a sense of purpose and belonging.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be something that's, publicly recognized or praised.
It's about that feeling of connection and community that we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
And it doesn't require us to sacrifice ourselves or meet other people's expectations.
Right. It comes from a place of self-acceptance and a genuine desire to connect with others. It's about building those horizontal relationships, based on respect and equality.
Not the vertical ones that are all about hierarchy and approval seeking.
Exactly.
This concept of horizontal relationships really resonates with me. It just seems like such a healthier way to approach our interactions with others. But I'm curious how we actually put this into practice.
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about it, but how do we actually live it?
Especially when we're dealing with people who might not be on the same page.
Right, like what do we do when we encounter those vertical relationships in our lives?
Exactly. How do we navigate those situations?
That's where the idea of separation of tasks becomes really important.
Right.
Remember, we can only control our own actions and responses.
Right.
We can't control other people's behavior.
So even if someone is being disrespectful or hurtful,
Yeah.
we can choose to distance ourselves or set boundaries.
Exactly. We don't have to take on their emotions as our own. The book gives this example of a young man who's struggling with a difficult boss.
Okay, so it's like, even though he can't change his boss's behavior,
Right.
he can choose to approach his work with integrity
Yes.
and focus on what he can contribute.
And that sense of self-worth and contribution, it can ultimately be more fulfilling than, seeking approval from a boss who's never going to give it.
It's about finding that internal validation
Yes.
rather than relying on external sources.
And it all circles back to that idea of, the courage to be normal.
It's not about settling for a mediocre life. It's about recognizing the inherent value and beauty of each moment.
Yes. Regardless of external achievements or recognition.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking, but I'm wondering how it translates into concrete actions.
Yeah, how do we actually put this into practice?
Like the young man in the book, he's looking for some practical steps, right? He wants to know what he can actually do to apply these concepts to his own life.
Right. He wants the how-to guide.
Exactly. And I think a lot of our listeners are probably feeling the same way.
Yeah, I think so too.
So what are some concrete things we can do to start living in alignment with these Adlerian principles?
Well, that's where we'll delve deeper in part 3 of our exploration. We'll unpack specific strategies for applying these concepts in our everyday lives.
Okay, deep divers, we've really dug deep into Adlerian psychology over these past 2 parts.
Yeah, we have.
But now it's time to get practical.
Yeah, let's bring it down to earth a bit.
How do we actually take all these big ideas from the courage to be disliked and make them work in our everyday lives?
Right, like we've hiked up this incredible mountain of knowledge.
Right.
Now we gotta figure out how to get back down and actually use what we learned.
Yeah, and integrate it into our daily routines, right?
Exactly.
So where do we even start?
Well, I think one of the simplest but most powerful things we can do is to cultivate gratitude.
Okay, gratitude. We've touched on that a few times already.
Yeah.
But how do we actually make it a consistent practice?
Start small. Maybe take a few minutes each morning to just jot down 3 things you're grateful for.
Okay, that's manageable.
Right. Or send a quick text to a friend just to let them know you appreciate them.
Yeah, I like that. Just little things to kind of shift our perspective.
Exactly. And, over time, those small shifts, they can have a ripple effect. You start to see the good in others more easily. You're more present in your interactions.
Okay, so gratitude is a great starting point.
Definitely.
What else can we do to put these Adlerian principles into action?
Well, we talked a lot about horizontal relationships, right?
Yeah.
Treating everyone with respect, recognizing their inherent worth, regardless of their status or achievements. That's something we can practice every single day.
I can see how that would lead to more genuine connections,
Yeah.
but it also seems kind of challenging, especially when you're dealing with people who have very different beliefs
Yeah, for sure. It takes effort.
or values.
It takes conscious effort to kind of break free from those patterns of vertical relationships.
Yeah.
But I think if you can just remember that, we're all just human beings, we're all just trying to figure things out,
Yeah.
it becomes a little bit easier to approach others with empathy.
Even if you don't agree with them. Yeah.
Exactly. It's about leveling the playing field for connection.
And that ties back to having confidence in others, doesn't it?
It does.
Like if you can choose to believe in the inherent goodness of other people.
You're more likely to approach them with an open mind,
Yeah.
an open heart.
It's about fostering that sense of safety and acceptance that we all crave in relationships.
Absolutely.
But what about applying these principles to our own personal growth?
Yeah.
I know a lot of our listeners struggle with self-doubt.
Mm-hmm.
That fear of being just average, like the young man in the book.
Right.
Any advice on overcoming those kinds of self-limiting beliefs?
Well, I think it starts with self-acceptance. That's not about resigning yourself to mediocrity.
Right.
It's about recognizing that you're not perfect.
So you're not trying to be perfect. You're just trying to be better.
Exactly. Focus on making progress in the areas that matter to you.
Set realistic goals.
Yes.
Break things down into smaller steps. Celebrate those small wins along the way.
And as you start to see yourself making progress, it can be so empowering.
It's like you're taking back control of your own narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is all so inspiring, but I think it's important to acknowledge that change can be hard.
Yeah, definitely.
What about those times when we inevitably fall back into old patterns?
Yeah.
How do we stay on track?
Well, it's a journey,
Yeah.
It's not a destination. There are going to be ups and downs.
So we might stumble.
Yeah.
But we don't give up.
We don't give up. And I think, when you find yourself getting discouraged, just come back to those core principles.
Right.
Remind yourself, self-acceptance, contributing to something bigger than yourself.
Focusing on those horizontal relationships.
Yeah.
Being present in the moment.
It's about creating a new framework for understanding yourself and your place in the world.
And it starts with that courage to be yourself.
To be your normal self.
To embrace your normal self.
Yes.
Even if it means not everyone's going to approve.
Yeah. And, I think if you can do that, if you can really live in alignment with your values, you'll experience a new level of freedom and purpose.
It's not just about chasing happiness or success. It's about living authentically, connecting with others, in meaningful ways, making a positive impact.
Yeah, that's what it's all about.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. I know I'm going to be thinking about these ideas for a long time to come.
Me too.
Deep divers, we encourage you to revisit the concepts we've explored today.
Yeah, think about how they resonate with you.
What small steps can you take to integrate these Adlerian principles into your own lives?
Yeah, what new possibilities open up when you embrace that courage to be disliked?
Until next time, keep diving deep.